Why do so many listings out there feel stale? Well, here is your answer. The US housing market has nearly 500,000 more sellers than buyers, the most on record, and that will likely cause home prices to fall, according to Redfin. Welcome back to my channel, everyone. Let's get into it and talk about what's going on in the real estate market, especially here in Phoenix. So Redfin is sharing that there are 34% more sellers in the market than buyers, and at no other point in records dating back to 2013 have sellers outnumbered buyers this much. In other words, this is a buyer's market. Now, this isn't really new news to us because we've been looking at this for a while. We know that inventory has been increasing here in the Phoenix area, but those are some big numbers. And when you put it in perspective of how long it's been since we've had this type of situation in the market, it does, make you think, is this going to continue? Or are we going to see some leveling off? Now, if you talk with any of the experts, like Logan Motoshami, for example, from Housing Wire, he says that this is actually a good thing. We are seeing enough inventory out there to actually have a functioning real estate market at this point, rather than one that is savagely unhealthy, I believe is what he has referred to it in the past. Now, all of that said, there are still challenges with affordability, and there are some metros where the upper middle class cannot afford home prices in that area. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. Now, Redfin expects home prices to drop by 1% at the end of the year. As a result, prospective buyers may see their purchasing power increase, and prospective sellers should consider selling sooner than later. 31 of the top 50 metros are buyers markets, the strongest areas being Miami, where sellers outnumber buyers roughly 3-1. The strongest sellers market is Newark, and the most balanced market is St. Louis. So I have heard from other folks, other peers of mine, as well as potential clients making a move to the Phoenix area from the East Coast. And the East Coast is still more of a seller's market in many, many places. And so it's very interesting how different areas of the country are experiencing different things. However, as a whole, when we look nationally, the amount of inventory that we're seeing has certainly climbed to new highs. Now, I talked a little bit about this last week, specifically here to Phoenix, but they're also saying the condo market heavily favors buyers. There's 83% more condo sellers than buyers. By comparison, there's 28% more sellers than buyers in the single family home market. So it's a pretty big difference. If you're a buyer out there looking for a condo or even a townhome, especially in the Phoenix metro area, you are seeing much more of a buyer's market than a seller's market. Now, Redfin also published a new article saying U.S. home sellers are sitting on nearly $700 billion worth of listings, which is an all-time high. Not super surprising if we actually think about what's going on. We have inventory rising to levels we haven't seen in a long time, and we've seen price increases over the last 5 years. So therefore, these home prices, even though we're seeing some fluctuation, they're higher prices than we've ever seen in some cases. So 700 billion worth of listings is probably not that hard to meet an all-time high. They say more than $330 billion worth of listings have been sitting on the market for 60 days or longer. Rising inventory and slow home buying demand is pushing up the total dollar amount of home listings and will push down home sales prices by the end of the year. Now, we looked at prices here in Phoenix a while back. I want to take another look at that in a couple different methods. First of all, when you pull up the monthly median sales price, it's kind of a stark reality right there that we have seen prices come down month over month. Now, this is looking monthly at the median. So there's a number of different ways to measure this. And depending on what you're looking at, it's going to show you something different. So just looking at the monthly prices, our April prices, median sales price was lower than what we saw in March, as well as February and even January when we started out the year. This is the lowest price that we've seen since last July. Last August and September is when we saw something in a similar range. We've certainly gone back down. Now, if we look at the monthly average sales price per square foot, this is also showing a downward trend, but obviously looks a little bit different because they're measuring dollar per square foot. All in all, though, since January, we've seen this come down, starting at $316 a square foot in January. It hit a low point in April at $301, and then it bounced back slightly in May to $301.92 instead of 24 cents, generally about the same price. Now, if you are a seller or if you're a buyer, it may be helpful for you to know what the median home price is in a particular city, whether you live there, if that's where you're looking to buy. So if you want to get that information specifically, we can share that with you. Check the description below to request that information. Now, we have been tracking the inventory here in Phoenix since the beginning of the year and just seeing it climb. Then we saw it start to level off a little bit, a tiny little dip. Where are we today? We're still kind of leveling off, I would say. I wouldn't consider this a dip, but we're not climbing any longer. So we're at 26,637 active listings as of May 31st, which is, much higher than what we've seen. If I take you back through the last few years, definitely seeing many more homes on the market than we have seen in recent history. However, this isn't continuing to climb as we're approaching the summer months in the summer market, which is usually a little bit slower. And last week, I said we need to check on how May ends up in terms of new listings added to the market, because every single month this year, we have seen that the number of new listings added to the market have outpaced the number of new listings added that month in 2024 and 2023. But May was like barely getting there. And I was like, I'm not really sure if we are actually going to see more new listings in May than we have the last 2 years in May. And the data is in, you guys. We had 8,797 new listings hit the market in May. And last year we saw 8,671. We just barely beat it. If you look back to April, we had 10,000. The previous year we had 8,800. And then looking at March, we had 10,000. The previous year we had 9,100. So we have been outpacing it, pretty significantly. Now just barely in May. So I am very curious to see what happens in June if we are adding enough new listings to beat our number of in 2024, which was 7,483. Based on the trends that we're seeing, I'm going to say we won't outpace that, but who knows? We got a month. We'll see what happens. If you are considering selling your home, especially going into more of the summer season, it is a little bit slower out there. Obviously, you have a lot of competition. Now, the good news for you is that, those new listings aren't continuing to climb. But the bad news is demand isn't really getting anywhere either. So if you are considering selling your home, you just want to know kind of what your value could be, check the description below for an instant home value, just to give you an indication of where you may be with that home value. Now, in terms of buyer demand, a lot of that has to do with mortgage rates. Much of it does have to do with prices, don't get me wrong, but there are a lot of buyers out there that base their purchase on their payment, and their mortgage rate is really what affects that. And so what is going on with mortgage rates? Well, they are unfazed by crazy economic headlines. We do have jobs reports coming in this week, which could affect the market. So keep an eye on all of that. If you are currently, working on purchasing a home and working with a lender, make sure you're staying in touch with them to know how rates may fluctuate this week, whether it be in your favor or not. According to Mortgage News Daily, mortgage rates edge higher to start a busy week. Mortgage rates have been exceptionally narrow range since last Tuesday, with the 30-year fixed index hovering just under 7%. The average lender is is just a hair higher today versus last Friday, but still under 7%. On Monday, there was economic data, a key report on manufacturing from ISM. They say this report often has an effect on rates. It was fairly minimal this time, but it helped rates avoid a sharper increase. So yay for you home buyers out there that escaped an increase on rates this week. So far, at least. As the week continues, several other important reports will be released. Friday's job report is traditionally the most closely watched when it comes to the rate market. Now, if you take a look at where we're at with the 30-year fixed, as of today, about 6.96%. We are under 7, finally got under 7 just last week, towards the middle of last week, coming down off of that peak. So it's great to be under 7, but we'll see if that stays consistent through the news of this week. Now, I said there's some surprising data where there are about 15 metros where the upper middle class actually can't afford a home in those areas. And I want to share that with you. Let's see if Phoenix Metro has anything on that map. But before we get there, if any of this is helpful for you, consider subscribing to become part of our community and share this video with someone who might find it helpful. So 15 cities where even the upper middle class can't afford a typical home. This is somewhat surprising when you look at the incomes for the area, right? So San Jose being number 1, median home price, $2 million. Okay, that is the median, you guys. That's not even the high end. The highest middle class income, $272,000. Obviously, $272 is a great living, but when the median home price is $2 million, that gets a little tight. When we look at Anaheim, median home price is $1.4 million. The highest middle class income, $169,000. We have Santa Ana, California. Are we surprised that all of these are in California? Then we have Hawaii, traditionally not an affordable place to live in terms of home prices. Another California, and then boom, we got Scottsdale, Arizona. The Phoenix metro area made it on the map. So the median home price in Scottsdale, $1.1 million, the highest middle class income, $212,000. So unfortunately, Scottsdale is making this list along with all of these California cities and Hawaii. They also have San Francisco, Newark, New Jersey, Los Angeles, Long Beach, California, San Diego. Oh my gosh, everything is in California. Another East Coast, New York, Miami, Chula Vista, California. Those are the 15 cities where that upper middle class income is still not cutting it to afford the median home price there. Now, one thing I think is interesting, I get a lot of comments about people saying that no one is buying homes or there's no way anyone can afford to buy homes. And that's not the reality. There are still people buying homes. And while this doesn't seem achievable by everyone, there is an area of the population that can still afford to buy homes, needs to buy a home, and still will. And I thought this article was pretty interesting. They say most Americans still feel locked in by their current mortgage rate and looking for rates below 4%. But they did a survey that said, how strongly do you agree or disagree with the following statement? I have delayed purchasing a home due to high mortgage rates. And they broke this up by generation. So Gen Z, 25% strongly agree with that statement that they've delayed purchasing a home because of mortgage rates. But then if you jump to the baby boomers, they are the complete opposite. They disagree. 33% said strongly disagree on that statement. So these rates are not stopping the boomers. They are making Gen Z more hesitant. Millennials, 25% said that they strongly agree with that statement. And then Gen X, only 15%. So the older generations are saying these rates aren't crazy. This is what we're used to, and it's not stopping us from buying a home. Arguably, they also may have more cash for a down payment. They may have equity in a current home that they're able to sell. It makes it a little bit easier to get into, possibly. But I think this is so interesting to see that, when we look at the market right now, millennials and Gen Z are the biggest group of home buyers out there. And they are pausing based on mortgage rates, or, a good portion of them are saying that has delayed their home purchase. They also also asked them where mortgage rates would have to be to consider buying a home. Almost a third of respondents reported that rates do not affect their decision to purchase. Just 2% of the respondents say they would be willing to buy with rates above 6%, where rates have been stubbornly situated since mid-September of 2022. Most respondents, which was 63%, are looking for rates to fall below 5% or even lower to consider buying. Roughly 82% of current mortgages have a rate of 6% or lower, emphasizing the challenge that high mortgage rates continue to present. So while home prices are super important for us to be tracking, and we will likely continue to see some fluctuation in home prices as our inventory grows, we also have to keep tabs on what's going on with rates, because the biggest buyer pools out there are very much affected by what's going on with rates. So if you are someone out there who is considering buying a home and you're trying to avoid today's rates, consider assumable mortgages. Check the description below. I have a guide that will help you understand how this process works, and also a list of homes in the Phoenix area with assumable mortgages if that is something you're interested in doing. Now, when it comes to supply and demand, these are the big factors we're looking at in our market to understand what's happening here. And we saw demand go down ever so slightly. If you remember, this number has been at 80 and above for the last few weeks, just slightly, but it has read 80 and now we're at 79.7. So that is truly 20%, almost 21% below normal. And our supply is 9.2% above normal. So as I say every week, we have a situation where supply is outpacing demand. If you're not familiar with this is thank you to the Cromford report, and they have this market index that looks at supply and demand factors in the market. The overall market index, 73.1. Anything below 90 is considered a buyer's market. So definitely in a buyer's market for the majority of Phoenix Metro. They do break it down by every major city here, and we're seeing most cities in either a balanced market or a buyer's market. Anything under 110 is considered balanced until you get under 90, and then it's considered a buyer's market. So Peoria down to Maricopa, all technically in a buyer's market. And when we look at Cave Creek all the way up to Glendale, that's all considered a balanced market. Paradise Valley, barely hanging in there at a seller's market. And then Avondale, Chandler, and Fountain Hills, the only major cities in Phoenix Metro that remain sellers markets. Now, they always look at the average change month over month of all of these cities. And last week, the average was negative 4.1%. This week, the average, negative 3.5%. So it is a little bit of a slowdown in that deterioration for sellers, although we know what's going on with the time frame of the market, the increasing inventory, and demand really not jumping back in. So I don't see that slowing down too much over the next few months, but we'll have to keep an eye on things. Now, we always like to look at the contract ratio as well, because this helps us see a little bit more real time the number of actual listings in a particular zip code and how many of those listings are actually under contract. And for the most part, we're seeing a lot of green in here, which is balanced and warm. The blue is considered cold. All of these zip codes are a little bit different depending on their supply and demand, but a couple we have Phoenix, which is actually considered hot. We've got El Mirage, Tullison, and then here in the East Valley a little bit, Mesa, Tempe area, some hotter areas as well. But overall, you can see it's looking like a pretty cool market across the valley. I'll be keeping an eye on any fluctuations in mortgage rates due to any economic news this week, and I will see you guys all next week with my next market update. Thanks for joining me.